Everyone, and welcome. My name is Andrea Rodriguez. I am a program officer at the Inter-American Committee Against Terrorism, SICTE, of the Organization of American States, and I will be your moderator for today. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping matters. I want to remind you that we have simultaneous English, Spanish interpretation available. Just make sure you select your preferred language at the bottom left corner of your screen. If you have any questions for the panelists, which will give time to do a Q&A after all three of them have presented, since you're all connected as viewers, please send them to llaurie@oas.org. I'm going to repeat that. That's going to be llaurie@oas.org. And we'll try to get to some of those at the end. I will repeat the email address later again. We are honored to welcome all of you back to our third and final day of the virtual roundtable on women in maritime and port security. First of all, I would like to thank again our donor, the government of the United Kingdom, our panelists, and the participants for their support, their dedication, and especially their time, but most importantly, their work together towards substantial solutions on the issue of gender inequality in the maritime domain. We've had 3 enriching days aimed to identify and explore the factors that contribute to perpetuating gender inequalities in the maritime and port security fields. And we have explored the causes of gender gaps through the experiences and perspectives shared by our distinguished panelists. So just to do a little recap, on our first day, we addressed women's challenges in the maritime industry, but we also heard and celebrated some success stories shared by Ms. Carla Jeffrey, Border Security Program Manager from the Overseas Territories Directorate, Ms. Stacy Kirkhoff, Regional Manager of Maritime Security Operations in Pacific Region from Transport Canada, and Captain Mary Bird from the Port of Northern California of the U.S. Coast Guard. We also explored some opportunities for women in the region through the presentations given by Ms. Mona Svoboda, Program Manager of the Inter-American Committee on Ports, and Ms. Ricky Lambie, Port State Control Officer from the Belize Port Authority. Both of them emphasized the importance of taking advantage of the available tools and searching for further opportunities, as well as the importance of networking. During our second day, we held virtual roundtables that covered 3 significant topics, which were social inclusion and diversity, leadership, and women in the maritime domain. Different experts facilitated these forums in their respective areas. Social inclusion and diversity was moderated by Ms. Betilde Munoz, Director of the Department of Social Inclusion at the Organization of American States. The Leadership Forum was moderated by Ms. Virginia Garcia Boudot, a specialist in strategic communications. And the last group, Women in Maritime Domain, was moderated by Ms. Audrey McNeil, who is the coordinator of the International Maritime Security Platform for the Port Authority of Jamaica. Through these 3 groups, we learned about the challenges that most women face, and together we made recommendations to these issues. So for today, we also have a great panel of experts, and without further ado, I would like to proceed with our agenda for today. And I'll introduce our first panelist, Ms. Helen Bonney, from the Marine Environment Division of the International Maritime Organization. Ms. Bonney joined the International Maritime Organization in 2003 in her role as IMO's focal point for women in maritime under the Technical Cooperation Division. She manages the organization's gender and capacity building program with a focus on training, visibility, and recognition. When Ms. Helen joined the UN Maritime World Organization in 2003, it was still largely a male-dominated environment, prompting her to take a pivotal role in the development of a strategy for the integration of women in the maritime sector. Ms. Helen's strong belief is that The shipping industry is missing out on the skills and value that women can bring to the sector. Women add a different perspective and significant expertise in a very traditional industry, which is crying out for change. Her lifelong goals include reducing the gender gap on the water, encouraging more young girls and women to consider a career in maritime, and to alleviate some of these challenges that women in the maritime realm face, such as developing leadership, confidence, having to overcome unconscious bias, access to training opportunities, and a lack of visible role models and mentors in the industry. Ms. Bonnie, please welcome and thank you so much for being with us today. The floor is yours. I believe you're muted, Helen. We see you, but we can't hear you. We hear
Hello?
you now.
Okay, so thank you to whoever is manning the technology behind the scenes. A very good afternoon, or I guess good morning for yourselves. Thank you so much for inviting me along to talk about IMO's Women in Maritime program and best practices, and for the warm welcome and introduction. Let's see if technology will be my friend. I do sincerely hope so. So my name is Helen Bunny. I manage the organization's international maritime organizations capacity building gender program. So it's a Women in Maritime program. It was established in 1988 and under the slogan training visibility recognition. The program is very much about not rewriting the narrative, but in this traditionally male dominated industry, it's about saying, well, how can we afford to limit our resources by excluding women? In an industry that relies on the human element for its safety and success. This program initiated, as I said, in 1988. So it's been running for 32 years, 33 now, at a time where very few training institutions had opened their doors to female students. Since then, the program has actively supported access to training and employment opportunities for women in the sector. The premise of the program is very much twofold. The first part of the program is supplying short upgrading courses or fellowships for women on port security, port operations, port management primarily. And the second part of the program is the establishment of 7 networks to improve gender balance in the shipping industry. So these 7 networks are based in Africa, Arab states, Asia, Caribbean, Latin America, and the Pacific. And they cover some 152 countries and dependent territories. These networks, or Women in Maritime Associations, or WEMAs for short, are really important, and no more so that in these COVID times where networking, connecting, being part of something, an association or organization to support each other, share best practices, share challenges, shares opportunities, has never been more important or relevant. And IMO provides a platform for these networks, as I said, to not just to establish contacts and share opportunities and challenges, but also provide a mentorship platform. So we support these networks at a regional level, and then they're encouraged to create what's called national chapters. And it's at these national chapters, some of the grassroots work that is being done, and that I'm so very proud of the program, from career days to mentorship schemes to HIV prevention, sexual health, to talking to school children about the importance of a career in maritime, the importance of studying STEM subjects, which is becoming more and more relevant with new technologies and how the maritime world is changing. Um, Outreach opportunities, talking about the importance of the environment, talking about domestic violence, more so during COVID. We've seen a huge increase in domestic violence. The sort of messaging has been stay at home, stay safe, but more often than not, what we're seeing is an increase in gender-based violence brought about by the fact that people are staying home, but that's not necessarily staying safe, staying perhaps with an abusive perpetrator. So through the program, we've tried to establish a number of initiatives. We are here predominantly as a small UN agency. We're a specialized UN agency on the banks of the River Thames. Normally on the banks of the River Thames. Right now in COVID times, working from home, but the work still very much continues. And actually, it's something, as part of my presentation and lessons learned, I'd like to delve into, and then perhaps maybe we can continue the dialogue on another occasion when we have more time. The challenges facing women around the world are very much relevant, whatever region of the world we're talking about, whether it's low levels of women in leadership and participation, gender-based violence, access to justice, access to educational opportunities. We know globally women hold an average of 22.5% of parliamentary seats, account for over 6.
Excuse me, Ms. Bonnie, are you sharing the presentation?
Oh, sorry, I was just gonna talk through it because
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were on the presentation. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. I will share some of the. No problem. I will share some of the slides. No problem. So in 1 in 3 women globally experience physical or sexual violence by an intimate partner. I mean, these statistics are shocking. We know in terms of major peace process, women between 92 and 2019 account for 13% of negotiators, 6% of mediators, and only 6% of the signatories. So what are we trying to do for the program, and how are we trying to sort of adapt our technical assistance and our support that we're giving to member states, and using the COVID crisis, so taking that challenge and turning that into opportunities, basically. Very much when I joined IMO, it was a very male-dominated industry. That was in 2003, and fast forward to today, well, we are seeing progress, but albeit, very slowly. At the current rate, taking 100 years to reach gender parity in the shipping industry, what could be done about that, and how can we move the conversation away at talking about people's gender to talking about people's competencies? In an industry where we are transporting over 90% of world trade, disregarding 50% of the talent pool doesn't make sense. Disregarding 50% of the world's most promising leaders doesn't make sense. We know in a McKinsey global study from 2015, the headline takeaway was that women's equality can add 12 trillion to global growth. And yet, what a lot of, I guess, the big problem in the industry is that we know that diversity drives profitability, but how to go about incorporating that, how to go about attracting the best talent, how to go about retaining the best talent, how to make those opportunities visible to the next generation. So that's very much the essence of the program, what we're trying to do. And what COVID has, I guess, allowed us is to sort of put to the fore that maritime has to be at the heart of the recovery, and that we need to recover equitably and sustainably, and put women's leaderships and contributions at the very heart of that recovery. But easier said than done. Now, one of the things that we've learned from women leaders in the pandemic, so last week was International Women's Day, and it was very much centered around the UN Women campaign, was about women in leadership, and how can we include them at the decision-making table? How can we promote those women leaders? You know, International Women's Day is one day out of 365 days that we are working to ensure diversity in the industry, that women's contributions do count, because we know greater diversity brings about greater innovation, greater ideas. We know that where you have peace agreements, for example, that include women, those agreements tend to be more durable. And what COVID has allowed us to do is to have some key takeaways or lessons learned from how women have actually handled the pandemic, and it's really brought to the fore the disproportionate burden as well that women carry, where throughout the crisis, women have, if they choose, have continued working, but also carried the main burden of childcare. Yet women have stood on the forefront of this pandemic, and yet, and sort of, we need to take away some of those lessons learned, I guess, of how perhaps some of the women leaders have handled the pandemic. Yet not forgetting at the same time that only women are heads of state of government in only 20 countries worldwide. And some of the research has shown or has identified sort of 4 common threads in women's leadership during the pandemic: trust, decisiveness, technology, and love. And sort of 6 key takeaways, if you like, from how women leaders handling the pandemic, is how we're trying to apply them now very much to our women in maritime going forward. So including everyone, being authentic, telling the truth, the use of technology, being decisive, and leaders of every kind learning from women, and that even small contributions, albeit positive, can affect change. And the idea being, if you incorporate truth, decisiveness, technology, love into thoughts and actions in your programming, and knowing and trusting the person at the top, whoever that may be, is committed to advancing the interests of everyone, has really been brought to the fore of the pandemic. The Women in Maritime program really took off in 2019, because 2019 was the World Maritime theme, empowering women in the maritime community, and that really allowed us to shine a spotlight and encourage more gender conversation in the maritime space. But of course, conversation is just talking. What we want is to move that to actions and make those actions time bound and realistic and sustainable, and very much the way forward. I mean, COVID has completely changed the modus operandi, our working ways, the traditional working ways of how we deliver our technical assistance in IMO has completely changed, because it was traditionally, and still very much is, because we're learning, of course, it was still very much going to countries, delivering technical assistance, being there, being present. But now, of course, COVID has allowed us an opportunity to expand our outreach. And we've had to completely rethink how we deliver our technical assistance. I guess priorities for the program, and taking on board some of the lessons we've learnt, is, first of all, are we doing enough to make our industry more diverse, and what more needs to be done? And I guess a key takeaway for us for the way forward is no more working in silos, increasing those strategic partnerships that we have. Last month, we announced the launch of the IMO WISTA International Study on the number of women in maritime. This is a really, really important initiative, the program, because how do you measure how far you've come if you have no baseline data to start with? So by counting the number of women and men and the positions they occupy will give us some sort of comparable data, and it will assist our programming and hopefully policy making to increase more participation of women in the sector. We want to promote a more diverse and inclusive sector, but of course, if we have no baseline data to start with, how do you measure the progress? We talk about 1 to 2% of the world's seafarers are women, but we don't actually know. So the survey is open to the 30th of June. And the idea being it will hopefully start to give us that baseline data that we so very much need. As I said, robust data is what's missing. We're also trying to counter some of the manuals we see. So in the industry, and all too often than not, by establishing a speakers bureau of experts to talk about a number of issues, because we get asked to nominate experts for various conferences, seminars, workshops, etc. But having that actual readily available database, I think, will be a real game changer. And again, moving it away from talking about gender, but talking about competencies. That's very much the focus. In-house, there are moves underway to try and reduce biases and embrace equality and diversity within the organization. And that's not just within the IMO Secretariat, but that's also with the delegates as well. As we're seeing a shift towards addressing diversity and representation, but we're not there yet. Just very quickly, International Women's Day was earlier this month on the 8th of March. We launched My Maritime Mentor campaign to celebrate some of the efforts made by women. I'd say that again. My Maritime Mentor campaign it was very much to celebrate those mentors, those male and female allies that support us and that build us up and that give us the confidence and the leadership skills to take that seat at the decision-making table. We announced the launch of a leadership accelerator program, and that's very much based on equipping women in senior management from developing countries with those skills, be it on unconscious bias training, be it on sort of almost like a train the trainer approach, so that they can take that knowledge back to their respective countries and build up their male and female colleagues, but by starting a networking platform. Role models, huge visibility. You had the wonderful Ricky Lambley from Belize. Ricky was one of the role models that we profiled as a port senior control officer. She was one of the very first people that we profiled. These profiles on the IMO website and on social media get about 40,000 hits, likes, retweets, and they are a great way to just to showcase some of the opportunities, the role models, the mentors that we have in the industry, because too often than not, girls and boys don't even know about maritime career as they journey through their schooling life. On the premise, if she can see it, she can be it. Having those role models to say, okay, there are these opportunities out there. How can I go and find those opportunities? How can I connect with like-minded people that can help me with my career? So we're really proud of these profiles, and they've had a tremendous impact, and it's really showcased the wide portfolio of opportunities there are out there. Women in Maritime Photo Share, again, it was another campaign or initiative to build up a bank of images of women in maritime. We have now more than 200 images, and they are a range of images showcasing women in various roles, as captain, chief engineer, port state control officer, etc., to show that that women have to be visible, and to achieve that diverse workforce, we need to have representation in not just maritime media but also mainstream media. I've sort of covered a lot of what I was going to say, and it should have been presented beautifully in a nice presentation, but seeing as technology doesn't want to be my friend today, I will try with the last slide, which is, if I may, just show you a very quick 1-minute recap of the Women in Maritime video. I'd be delighted to answer any questions that you might have, because I appreciate I've covered a lot of information and probably actually gone over my time limit, so apologies for that. Let's see if this works. No. I don't believe it's. Can you see on the screen? I possibly don't think it's working.
And remember to open the PowerPoint and then do the share screen and then application window from there.
Oh, application window. That's what I forgot. Let's try again.
We see it.
You see the slide? You see the video? Let's try again.
We can see it now.
Thank you. Ooh, what happened? Oh,
We're not hearing you, Miss Connie.
So we're not actually seeing the video. We just see a slide. I believe it was your very first slide.
Oh, sorry.
Didn't hear you. Can you do a refresh on your browser, please?
I'll try again.
Now request the floor again. Spani, can you request the floor? Once you come in, you don't have to do anything. Just open your microphone and your camera. Ms. Bunny, please request the floor again. Okay, now open your microphone and you open your microphone. No, we're losing you when you. I don't know what's going on. Andrea.
Yes. Yes, Mauricio, I'm here.
Creo que ella tiene problemas. Si Rosana, alguien la puede llamar.
All right, since we're having some technical difficulties with Miss Bunny, but we will have a chance to hear more from her at the end of the panels. So thank you, Miss Bunny, for your presentation, and it's been really interesting to hear about the work that the IMO does to promote greater diversity and opportunities for women in the field. Women have definitely been greatly affected by the pandemic, but as you highlighted, there are countless opportunities to continue to bridge the gender gap in the maritime field and in all fields for that matter. So we'll go ahead now and introduce our second panelist for today, Miss Natalie Sandefort. She is the lead Maritime and Port Security for the British Virgin Islands. Ms. Natalie Sandefort Francis is an experienced lawyer and a consultant who has been practicing for over 15 years. She specializes in maritime law and served as general counsel of the British Virgin Islands Port Authority. She is currently employed as a program and policy officer with the United Kingdom's Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, working as a policy lead on maritime security and port security in the governor's office in the British Virgin Islands. Ms. Natalie has a track record for providing legal, regulatory, and policy expertise to decision makers in the areas of maritime law and port security. She is passionate about driving sustainability in the Caribbean environment, and she's also a strong advocate for increasing women's presence in the maritime and shipping industry and the advancement of laws that protect women's rights. Ms. Sandefort, thank you very much for being with us here today. Please go ahead.
First, I would like to begin by thanking the organizers of this important event for inviting me to share my experiences as a female maritime lawyer and some of the lessons that I have learned in my journey. First of all, a little bit about myself. As indicated before, I've been practicing law for over 15 years. During the course of my career, I served as a senior crown counsel in the Attorney General's chambers in the BVI, providing advice to decision makers, especially in the areas of maritime transport, since I held the portfolio for communications and works in the AG chambers. And then I moved on to my role as general counsel of the British Virgin Islands Ports Authority, and now I work in the governor's office in the BVI for the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Agency. My job entails lots of things in the maritime sector from a governance perspective. We are involved with liaising with the BVI government and the FCDO and other key stakeholders in delivering port projects, maritime projects that affect the maritime environment as well. In my role, I am also responsible for identifying resources that support the territory's objectives, providing support on hydrographic and search and rescue projects, working with key stakeholders to help the territory prepare for the upcoming III code, ISBS inspections, and so on. So based on my dealings with top executives, decision makers, and other persons in this sector, I can say that women are making strides. We do have a seat at the table. However, our presence needs to be increased. The maritime sector is still very much a very male-dominated industry. And part of that stems from the fact that many young girls do not know about opportunities for women in the maritime sector. There's also this perception that women are not interested in the maritime sector, or that men would be better suited for these types of jobs because of the demands, um, the long hours required to sometimes get things done. In some areas, we are overlooked because of gender biases. And so here today, I want to talk a little bit about how maritime law and policy can be used to drive some of the change that we really need in this industry. Now, I have prepared for you a PowerPoint presentation, and it will be available after the segment upon request. I'm not going to be as brave as the speaker before me and try to put it on because I know of my challenges in technology, but I will speak a bit from it. Now, maritime law and policy, it covers many areas such as transport, trade, security, ports, labor, science and technology, maritime services such as insurance, research, law. It is a very big area, and so there is room for women in the industry, whether it is on the seas or in landside operations. There is more room for women. Now, policy can be used to articulate the objectives of decision-making bodies, of associations such as WISTA, WIMAC, IMO, and it can be used to express the interests of the general public and to formulate and implement solutions through legislation, through programs, projects, recommendations, and government. Now, law, on the other hand, is more stringent. Laws can be used to put things in place that ensures that bodies have to comply with what is there in the legislation. It can also be used to determine rights of parties and remedies due to them if laws have been breached. And the law can also be used to reach amicable solutions to disputes through the application of those laws. Some of the issues facing women in the maritime sector, some of those main issues relate to sexual harassment, gender bias, and discrimination. One of the things that stood out for me on Tuesday was that many women expressed as well that in working on vessels, there are inadequate facilities that are provided for them to work. And so in order for them to do their job and perform, they have to resort to other measures that men do not have to, say whether it's getting up early to take a shower or just being out there working harder and doing so much more. And that should not be the case. So we have to look at using policies to drive change in the maritime sector, especially for women who work on ships, that they do not have to feel that they have to go above and beyond and jump through hoops in order to perform simple activities that men do not have the challenges to do. We can also use policy to drive change in organizations in the maritime sector. I think it is important that in this industry, we have training programs at the organizational level that sensitize both males and females alike as to some of the issues affecting the sector that create great challenges for women, and we have to use those opportunities to come up with solutions that solve issues at the organizational level. Up from there, we also have to create opportunities, whether it's holding discussions such as this one that we're doing right now, for women to be able to express concerns at the national and regional level about the issues that affect them, and give us the opportunity to speak about lessons learned and how we can brainstorm to come up with new solutions to the problems that we face. Education is a very big issue. We need more training programs, that's one, but we also need education programs that appeal to women. We need to have education programs that are tailored to bring women into the maritime sector. IMO is doing a lot on this front, but we need to have this trickle down to the national, to the regional level. We need to be reaching out to educational institutions to encourage them to take this direction. And we can do that by implementing policies at the national level in order to achieve this objective. I think one of the important things for us to do as women as well is to join organizations that promote women's interests and basically speak up, be part of the discussion, have a seat at the table, make your voice be heard. I think the voice of women is something that we need to hear more from in this industry. And I think when we speak as a collective body rather than as individuals, we are taken more seriously and we can accomplish a lot more. Now, where I am in the BVI, there are no women's organizations. For my part, one of the things that I felt was necessary when I started to work at the BVI port was to be part of a women's organization to address certain issues. During my time there, I not only acted as general counsel of the port, but I also conducted some research into the underlying issues that affected the organization. And coming out of that, it is clear that there are many issues that need to be tackled. We need to do so in a diplomatic way. One of the issues that comes out is that in cases relating to, say for instance, sexual harassment, a lot of times claims from women are not taken seriously because it is a very male-dominated industry. Many times the women working in organizations, whether it be ports or shipping registries or research-based operations on ships, their voices are basically drowned out sometimes by the noise. And so claims, when they come up, sometimes the woman's claim is overlooked because people think, well, she is not a valuable asset to the organization. Oh, he does his job so much better. And so we don't want to lose this person. We don't want to lose this male because the level of input that he gives to achieve the organizational objectives are not comparable to what she puts in or what she's capable of putting in. Things men tend to do as well is look at the relationships that they build up in teams. So they tend to feel like, oh, the woman is the outsider and the man, he he works well with the team. It's mostly males and everybody gets along. Women are emotional, or they're not part of the team, or they're not a good team player. These are gender biases that we need to tackle, and I think we need to speak up more. We need to have more organizations in the Caribbean region, for instance, that represent the interests of women in the maritime sector, and that basically allow us to advocate for change, to lobby for changes as we approach governments, and basically demand what we want and also accomplish what we want. Um, I don't want to go too long because I am aware of the time limits, and there will be questions at the end of the segment. So I am going to be very brief and basically end it here, and I will share my presentation after. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sandefort, for your presentation, and particularly for highlighting the importance of women demanding a seat at the table and some of the steps that we must undertake to do that. So we'll go ahead and proceed with our third and final panelist for today for the session. She is Ms. Daffodil Maxwell. She's the Senior Legal Officer of the Port Authority of Trinidad and Tobago. Ms. Maxwell is a Trinidad and Tobago-born attorney at law, and over the last 8 years, she has practiced in various law areas with a focus on civil, corporate, maritime, contract, and real estate law. She started off working as an assistant to the legal advisor at Trinidad and Tobago's Maritime Services Division, and she then moved on to discover the manner in which laws in general were applied and argued by working as a research counsel for judges of the judiciary at the High Court and Court of Appeal. Her early work in the maritime and legal fields enabled her the opportunity to be chosen by the International Maritime Organization for a scholarship to further her studies in a master's in international maritime law in Malta. She graduated from the IMO's International Maritime Law Institute and was awarded the IMO Secretary General's Award for Best Dissertation for her degree, which focused on challenges faced by some states in the incorporation and enforcement of maritime conventions and some recommendations towards resolving those challenges. She eventually rose to the leadership position of senior legal advisor at the Port Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, where for the last 4 years, she leads a team of lawyers, paralegals, and a research analyst, and continues to advise on a broad spectrum of maritime and general legal matters. Ms. Maxwell, it's a pleasure to have you here with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andrea. You can hear good, right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Well, I just want to say I'm very happy to be here today. As Natalie mentioned, I think it's really important to have roundtable discussions like this that would assist women in discussing issues, but also coming up with resolutions to those issues. And I'm happy also to speak from the perspective of lessons learned and best practices, because I feel like if I'm one of the women that was blessed in being granted certain opportunities to further my studies in maritime law, and I've also had the opportunity to interact with a lot of different divisions of the maritime sector, whether it be in drafting and legislation over the court system. And then, well, presently I'm with the courts, so I also have that opportunity to interact with the shore side, the seafarer aspect of things, as well as with port security in defending them in a lot of matters. Right, so, well, without further ado, because I don't want to hold back, if you could just move to the other slide for me. Thank you. Now, I've been asked to speak about lessons that I've learned and best practices, and I believe that the two go hand in hand because pretty much if we truly learn from lessons, then they become the starting point in which we could create best practices to avoid the repetition of certain issues. Um, while I have high regard for advocacy of the challenges and the success stories of women, because I think it's necessary that we advocate on issues that may be going through in order to have greater awareness of those issues. I also think that it's important that we always take a further step to ensure that when we advocate certain issues, that we take the steps that may be required in order to resolve those issues. And therefore, I would like to break down the lessons that I have learned under three general headings. The first being the actual implementation and enforcement of policies and laws that are required to mitigate or resolve issues of gender inequality. The second being the adoption of the right attitudes that lead us to practice what is preached. And the third being an understanding that each of us as women play a part in our self-development, and also that our self-development is intended for the common good and not just for our personal ambition. So I'll just start with the first category on the next slide. Now, in terms of the actual enforcement of policies and laws that are required to mitigate and resolve issues of gender inequality, one of the things that I have learned is that, especially as a lawyer, you would find that sometimes gender inequality is not intentional. But usually what happens is because there's an absence of policies or guidelines, what would happen is that subjective decisions may be made, and as a result of that, the appearance of discrimination may arise from it. And if I'm just to give an example, for instance, in some organizations, it may happen that their salary ranges for certain positions. As a result of these salary ranges, women may find themselves in a position where they had received the lower part of the salary, whereas a man might have received the higher part of the salary. Now, if there was a policy to guide how the salary range was to be applied, you would find that there would be no misunderstanding in terms of the decision maker to the fact that gender is not to be considered, but rather the decision maker would have guidelines set out in the policy that would say the lower amount is to apply, maybe based on the experience of the person or the time working in the particular position, and that the higher amount is, to be applied if the person has greater experience and so forth. Right? Also in areas of recruitment, I find that sometimes the policies are absent. And therefore what happens is when you have persons applying for positions within the maritime sector, there may not be proper guidelines in relation to the agents that the employer appoints in order to recruit persons. So some of the organizations that I have worked with would have designed what they call standard recruitment templates, whereby standard questions would be asked to applicants, and that way you remove any, as Helen would refer to, you remove the whole talk about gender to instead we talk about competency, right? So I also find in terms of policy making, that one of the things that may assist in general policy making is more inclusion of women, and more so women that are in the field and who may know some of the things that you have to look out for when you're developing the policies. And therefore, I think attached to this lesson in terms of the fact that gender equality is not always intentional, but is caused by the absence sometimes of policies, I would say that the best practice is to focus not only on policies targeted specifically at women, which would be more the maternity and sometimes the sexual harassment policy, but to have a greater focus on the general application policies, which are the ones related to recruitment, application of salaries, organizational infrastructure, and with facilities. And the reason I included policies in relation to infrastructure and facilities, because one of the things that I have found is sometimes a simple thing like having a female washroom, separate from the male washroom, especially when we talk about the seafarers and the vessels, that might be an important thing. So if there's a policy to guide the from the stage of even the construction of certain facilities, it would be kept in mind that you have two different genders that have to operate in the same space, and we need to be able to give them, a certain level of respect in terms of separation of the facilities, right? The next slide, please. So this is something that, in terms of the right attitudes, now, one of the things that affected me, even as a student in law, was that you hear a lot about gender equality, right? And I saw this picture and I recognized there's a difference between equality and equity. As you see in the picture, everybody's given the same thing in the first picture, right? But the young child is unable to see over the wall. In the second picture, it would have been that the youngest child, who was the shortest, would have required two boxes instead of one. And one of the things that really touched me early on in my legal career, in terms of me trying to understand as a woman what gender equality means, is not necessarily that women should be granted all the same things that men should be granted, but rather that the makeup of a woman might be different from that of the makeup of a man. And in order for us to both perform at a higher level, it may be that women in some circumstances may have certain needs or requirements that an employer may have to extend themselves to provide, as opposed to just saying everybody has the same thing. And just to share a joke with you, in terms of one of the cases I came across, I remember, well, this was a case relevant to a particular vessel, and it had to do with the facilities that was made available to one of the females. She was one of the only female seafarers on the vessel. And in discussion with the master of the vessel, he just cracked a joke. He said, well, what you're asking for is equality of facilities. And the fact is that everybody on the ship is using the same bathroom facilities. Everybody on the ship has access to the same personal hygiene stuff, right? Because they would have had a standard list of things that would have to be purchased for the vessel. But really, the point wasn't giving everybody the same thing. The point was that in order for a woman to perform certain duties on the vessel, like the men would, that she would need certain different requirements. So the lesson learned here is that equality cannot always be satisfied by giving everyone the same thing. And really the best practice would be that in order to enable all a fair chance to perform, we should aim for equity, which is fairness, as opposed to just equality, right? And it's really the acceptance that men and women have different needs and requirements that would be necessary for each of them to perform at their highest level. Moving to the next slide, sorry. So one of the other things that I wanted to point out in terms of lessons learned is that as women, we also have a separate responsibility to ensure that, yes, our employers have certain things that they need to place, but as women now, usually the world, as part of the norms of the world, we're usually seen as caretakers and nurturers and comforters, just in the same manner that men may be seen as sometimes the protectors and the guardians, right? So I think more women, society-wise, might battle more than men in terms of balancing their family lives with their work lives. And it's something that I too have experienced. So as one of the lessons I have learned is that we ought to take responsibility for the personal activities that may fall outside of our work life, but which are capable of still impacting negatively on our employer, right? And one of the examples I could give from this actually comes from COVID-19. With COVID-19, it would have meant that a lot of children would have had to now do their studies from school, their studies from home, right? Because at least in Trinidad and Tobago, our schools had closed. As a matter of fact, our schools are still closed. It has been closed almost a year now, right? And what this would mean in the maritime sector in particular, for us at the Port Authority, our services could not have closed, right? Other organizations, let's say cinemas and so forth, they may close. So, the employee has to stay home. It's not really a problem because their children also have to stay home. In the maritime sector, because it was seen as an essential service, just as with port security, it would mean that persons still had to come to work, but you have a situation now where children have to stay home and do their schoolwork from home. And in some cases, especially for single mothers, there would have been a difficulty created as to how do you now continue to work and at the same time have to stay home with your children in order to supervise them. And thankfully, our government came up with the idea of pandemic leave in the earliest days of COVID, whereby certain persons were enabled to stay at home for a particular period in order to arrange their family lives. I think it was about a month or 2 months, and they would still be paid by the employer. But of course, as we realized COVID was going on for an exceptionally long time, it would now mean that that temporary measure that was taken would now have to become something more of a permanent measure. I remember having a discussion, even with my staff, some who are women, and with other persons in the sector, and it became recognized from an early stage that it was necessary as a woman for us to kind of assist the employer by putting things in place in terms of our children, whether it might be trying to get family support in terms of their supervision or working a particular shift hour. So the whole idea is that um, you don't want to be the woman who the employer gives, he really extends himself to try to assist you in a situation. But then you say, well, you need to assist me further because COVID is going on for a year, so I'm going to stay home for a year. You don't want to do that because, of course, and that's why I put this in there, Petra pays for Pauline, right? If we make it too difficult for the employer in terms of organizing ourselves, then in a way we might discourage other employers to adopt, a situation whereby they try to be flexible and compromise, right? So I just wanted to point out here that one of the better practices would be to recognize your personal responsibilities and do not let them negatively impact your employer with regard to the job performance. As a woman, you have to be proactive in putting the appropriate personal arrangements in place in order to enable continuity of work, but also, of course, to balance that responsibility you have to protect your family. Right? Going to the next slide. All right, so the next slide is really concerning also the adoption of the right attitudes. And I say this really from a personal perspective in terms of the nature and the makeup of a woman versus that of a man. And in terms of our nurturing side, I thought it interesting. Now, I hope I don't offend anybody in saying this, but I think naturally speaking, women are more capable of understanding a certain amount of emotions and that they can use those emotions to drive causes with great passion. As a matter of fact, the IMO, I was looking at the IMO's website under Women in Maritime and Gender Programs, where it stated that there's ample evidence that investing in women is the most effective way to lift communities, companies, and countries. And that countries with more gender equality have a better economic growth. Companies with more women leaders perform better. Peace agreements that include women are more durable. And parliaments with more women enact more legislation on key issues such as health, education, anti-discrimination, and child support. But as I read that, I also kept in mind that there's this popular saying that hell hath no fury like a woman's scorn. And really, while that particular quote is one that relates more so to women in a personal setting, I think the quote recognizes that if when we as women become too emotional about a subject matter, there's also a danger in that as well, right? And that's something that I, as a leader now, because I have quite a heavy staff and the pressures of my job could be quite strenuous sometimes. And sometimes I just have to hold and remember that when I'm making certain decisions that might affect the staff or the organization as a whole, I always have to ask myself why it is I would take that particular decision and try to rationalize it. Because I do think that is in the nature of a woman, because we could be so passionate about a particular subject, to sometimes, maybe make decisions that may be slightly based on emotion, but sometimes we need to, recall ourselves and remember the rationale behind what the decisions that we are making. And then my last two lessons on the next slide, and it concerns really understanding that we have a part to play in our self-development, and also that our self-development is intended for the common good and not just for personal ambition, right? And under this lesson is really a lesson of taking advantage of all the programs being offered locally, regionally, internationally to assist women in their growth. Um, Now, this is something that I kind of hold dearly because, as I mentioned before, I had received my opportunity through the Women's Program that the IMO offered. I was able to do my master's in maritime law because my country would have nominated me at the time, since I was working with drafting legislation at the time, and they would have seen a certain potential in me. And then the IMO would have fully funded my scholarship in order for me to go and study. But a lot of the times now, in terms of me finding that program, it did take a lot of assistance from other persons because I wasn't even aware of some of the programs that were available to women. So sometimes taking advantage of the opportunities means that you might actually have to research those opportunities. I do know that the IMO has a lot of opportunities. I imagine that the OAS may also have certain opportunities. As I said, the OAS is hosting this roundtable. And I know that even locally, we have the Women in Maritime Association that is now developing and that is trying to encourage women also to find out about certain programs and take advantage of them. So my sixth lesson is really in terms of it's one thing to provide the program, but it's another thing really to ensure that the woman takes up on the opportunity to actually participate in the program. And my last lesson learned would be now, of course, the aim of all the efforts in terms of progressing women in the maritime and port security sector is not one that is for individual personal gain, but one that once the woman is able to take advantage of those opportunities and starts climbing the ladders, that they would also look out for other women. And really, as I say here, the equality and equity comes with a responsibility. When you're blessed with that opportunity as a woman, it's something that you need to share with others. And I think we really have to, as women, encourage other women and take joy in the fact that they too will advance. And also, it's important too for us, not in our fight in terms for certain privileges for women, not to bring down men either, because I mean, at least in my progression and in my journey, there were also men who would have supported or shared their knowledge with me, and that has a lot to do with my success as well, right? So it's really a unified approach at the end of the day that it's not a matter of, promoting women, but bringing down men, but, really a matter of both women and men being able to work together and being able to be granted fairly the same types of rights and opportunities as the other. So that's just my 7 lessons. And as I said, I'm really grateful to be able to share them, and I hope that it might be of assistance to some of the other ladies on the panel. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Maxwell, for sharing your experience and these very relevant best practices to make all of us really, men and women, as you were just mentioning, more aware of gender issues and taking a more inclusive perspective. So before we go on and start the questions and answers session, I believe we're going to try one more time to share Miss Bonnie's video, if that's possible. If not, we'll just move on to the questions. All right, so for the sake of time, maybe we'll try to share a link or the video per se with the participants. We'll just give one more minute to see if we can make it. And if not, we'll continue with the questions. All right, so seeing that Ms. Bonnie just shared the YouTube link to the video. We'll just go on and continue with the questions and answers. So we did receive a question from one of the participants, and I'm gonna ask all of our three panelists if they can just activate their cameras and mics, because this is an open question, and then I'll go on to ask some specific ones. But just to whoever of you wants to go ahead first, the question is, have you observed any correlation between claims of gender bias and sexual harassment related to an individual and other types of observable negative or toxic behavior, for example, bullying, that may be directed against members of their own gender by the same individual? So I don't know if any of the panelists would like to take this question.
I would just comment on it. At least in relation to the sexual harassment matters now, they are generally in relation to women. You'd hardly find a man making a report about sexual harassment, but that doesn't mean, of course, that it doesn't happen. But even though it happens more to women, and bullying, bullying I find is more general to men and women. One of the things that I think is it's not so much gender-based, but really what you have to look at the person committing it tends to have or come from a particular background. So it might be, if it's a sexual harassment issue that's happening against a woman, right? So that the man is the perpetrator, the accused person. What I found is that the man tends to have come from a particular culture or background that may be a little more loose than that particular woman might have been accustomed to, or it might have come out of his growing up. So I can't say particularly that it's about, about gender in particular, but a lot about how a man grows up and how, what kind of background he comes from, more so. So I don't know if that answers the question, but at least that would be my finding in terms of cases related to sexual harassment. Because many times the men would try to justify what they did based on their background experience of how they have interacted with other women in the past who, according to them, had no issue with it. Right? So I think it has a lot to do with upbringing.
I would just like to add to what Daffodil said. I think that in situations such as these, sometimes we have to also look at the organization and how the organization treats instances of reports of this type of behavior. I found in my experience that usually when there is a report of this nature, and if you're, say, representing the organization and you sit down with that client and you say, well, is this the first time? Usually there are instances of reports that happened in the past that were either swept under the rug or they were not addressed properly, like maybe the individual was given a warning, but there was no strong disciplinary action taken against that individual in order to correct that type of behavior. And so because the individual got off with a slap on the wrist or the issue was not dealt with at all, they see that as a green light, that they can do it again to others in the organization. And it has real consequences for the employer because it can lead to claims for damages. It can also cause reputational damage to the organization. And it basically paints a situation, it creates an environment where other women working in the organization feel as though their interests are not represented and that their concerns are not heard. So it is something that has to be really tackled. We should adopt a no excuse approach. Men have to be sensitized and women have to be sensitized in this area, because we also have to be cognizant of the fact that usually while claims of bullying and sexual harassment usually involve men against women, there are also instances where women are the perpetrators. So organizations have to take steps to ensure through training programs, through discussions with employees, to really get ahead of this type of behavior, make it clear in employee handbooks that this type of behavior is not acceptable. But I don't think that it is sufficient as part of the orientation process either, that that employees are given handbooks to read, which they probably never do. And it is expected that because something is in a written policy or in an employee handbook, that is sufficient, and that the organization has done all that it can do to curb this type of behavior. There has to be training associated with the rules of the organization and the policies of the organization, and the training has to be ongoing training. It can't be like a one-off training. The solution has to be ongoing training, like maybe periodically, once every year, you have these type of meetings, and you have this type of training for all staff, both male and female.
I completely agree with Natalie, and just to add to that, I think also when we're holding persons accountable in terms of males for sexual harassment, it may not be sufficient either in terms of us putting a penalty on it, whether it be a suspension or warning letter, but sometimes because it's something that comes from their upbringing too, we have to look at employee assistance programs, and I know a lot of organizations have started that, so that the employee who commits the particular act, would be referred to employee assistance program to assist them in how they interact with females and so forth.
Thank you very much, Ms. Maxwell and Ms. Sandefort Francis. Ms. Bunny, if you could please request the floor so we can have you on screen as well. And I will go ahead with a question for Ms. Sandefort Francis. So being a woman in a male-dominated industry, what, in your opinion, what would be the first policies you would recommend changes to?
In this area, I think policy is very broad. I think what needs to be addressed is the need for clear policies, first of all, as it relates to sensitization to things such as gender bias, gender equality, sexual harassment. There needs to be policies that are implemented at the organizational level and also at the national level. I think it is important that these policies are not only in place, but that they are written in such a language that they are clear, so that ordinary persons are not bogged down with the legal type language and get lost in them or fail to understand what they encompass. And as I said before, I think training alongside policies is very important.
All right, yes, I absolutely agree. Ms. Bunny, I don't know if we have you yet. I believe we don't. We would need you to request the floor so we can hear you and see you. But I will go ahead with a question for Ms. Maxwell. So how can we encourage more educational opportunities in the maritime domain to increase the number of women that obtain degrees or certifications in studies related to maritime?
Actually, I think Helen would have mentioned something during his speech. Basically, that you have to make younger women, especially, more aware of the maritime sector as an option when it comes to choosing what career they want. You can't To me, at least as a woman, I remember being in secondary school, which is high school, and they would have career fairs, but it was always related to lawyers and doctors and engineers. But I actually never had somebody come from the maritime sector and expose that part to me. So to me, I learned more from maritime because my family would have been involved in that sector previously. But I think in order for women to vision themselves in the field, that we need to start looking not just as women at the professional level, but also women girls in terms of youths, right? In terms of going to the schools. And I remember in Trinidad, we used to have what they call a mentorship program, where basically they would take younger persons from secondary school. It was something that was started fairly recently, and they would expose them, for instance, to the Coast Guard and the port sector, so that they could have an understanding that this is an option available to them. So I think it's something that starts from a younger age. I think right now a lot of the programs are targeted more so to the professional level and maybe to the degree and the tertiary education. But there needs to be some focus at a younger level in terms of encouraging persons to adopt the maritime sector as a career, whether it be seaboard, captain, officer, pilot, whatever, or if it's land-based. There needs to be more exposure at that younger age so we could vision it, or women could vision it for themselves and, grow into it.
Thank you, Ms. Maxwell. Ms. Sandefort Francis, actually, if you would like to comment on that same question. We're going to start doing them a little more open-ended, and I think Ms. Bunny should be joining us shortly as well.
I wholeheartedly agree with what Daffodil just said. One of the panelists mentioned on Tuesday that the port sector, for instance, is not one that you are exposed to unless you actually have to go on a port. And so I think it is important that we have programs at the national level which would encourage young girls to vision themselves in some of these jobs. And I think that one of the ways that we can do that is through competitions. Like say we can have competitions in the school for kids to basically present some kind of creative work showing women in the maritime field or persons in the maritime field, and we could have things like best drawing or best song, best poem about women working in maritime, best boy working in maritime. We can do things that encourage this type of vision for women in this sector.
Thank you, both of you. We just received a question, or at least I'm just seeing it now on the chat. And again, this will be for any of you who would like to take it. So how can men be more aware of sexist behaviors exhibited in the workplace, especially behavior that impact organizational culture and individual careers? For example, mansplaining and devaluing female voices and views. This is a very timely question from one of our male participants.
It's an interesting question, actually. What I would say now, there's a tendency when, so for example, we're having a forum now, and it's good to hear that there are males on this particular forum, right? I'm not sure how exactly we could go about encouraging males to participate in some of the things that are more aligned to women issues, because as mentioned throughout, the real purpose of advocacy is really as a matter of awareness, right? Now, in terms of participation, so for instance, the male that might be asking the question right now would have perhaps throughout this roundtable learned of some issues that he may not have been aware of that, women might hold to heart in terms of their challenges. So I think that more collaboration in terms of involving men as well to participate in some of these roundtables that deal with women issues is necessary. And also in terms of the making of policies, I think always when you include somebody in making something, they have a tendency to abide by it. So while in my presentation I might have mentioned about the inclusion of women in the field in particular policies, I think it's also important in policy or legislative making that you also take the point of view of that the man might have on a particular issue. And you try to find a compromise situation that works in fairness to both parties, right? So it shouldn't be an exclusive approach where, as a woman, we have challenges, so we're trying to basically come up with the solutions on our own. But there should be more collaboration, basically, in dealing with the policies or the laws that might be relevant, or even in the discussion of the issues that might be relevant between men and women.
I just want to say I think that it is great that the question has been posed by a male who's attending the forum. Um, I wonder if it is possible to put that question back to Mr. Spencer and hear what his views are.
I put Mr. Spencer on the spot there.
I'm not sure if he's unable to speak at the moment, but Mr. Spencer, if you would like to comment on the chat, and I will step in and comment as well. Also, as a woman in a male-dominated sector, I think it's very important that we have these conversations, that we have these forums, and that we don't restrict it to just women, right? All of us need to sit at the table and just listen to each other. I would say that's the first step, trying to be more empathetic with what others go through, even if these are issues that don't affect us, if that's the case. But just trying to understand what others go through, I think it's a really very important step. We have another question from our participants. This is from Jessica Taylor. How significant do you find culture to be in gender bias and sexual harassment? I'm asking this as a port state control officer who interacts with crew of various nationalities during inspections. These are some tough questions.
I would definitely say that I think culture is actually critical because culture has a lot to do with how you're going to be brought up and what system you come from and what you expect as an individual from the other gender. I know that in some cultures, the woman might be viewed as lower um, in terms of a caste system, and while other cultures are more free in its interpretation of what a woman's role is. So obviously, I think in some cultures, a woman might even suppress herself because she understands, well, based on her learnings, and I mean, I speak about culture also attached to some religions, the woman might view herself as not being able to be more within the system or not being able to do more than a particular role, right? And I think that it's a hard topic in terms of resolving because I mean you can't culture is not something you could easily change, right? That's something I mean for years these things exist, religions exist in a particular way, but at least I think opportunities could be made available for the woman who might want to step out of that particular culture that she might have come from and would want to achieve something more without feeling that she has to be penalized. But I think it's actually the most difficult issue to resolve, and that's because it's not easy to change a culture. And culture is something that's embedded, just as a religion is. So I'm not sure if Natalie might have a resolution to this particular one, but I do agree that culture plays a huge role in the gender equality issues that sometimes exist.
Yes, it is true that culture plays a very important role. I think there are strategies that can be employed at the organizational level and the societal level to effect change. But change management is one area that organizations, or one strategy that organizations use to implement new policies and new guidelines, new objectives, and so on. Conducting this, though, at the national level will take efforts not only from us as women, but from governments as well, through campaigns to bring awareness to many of the cultural issues that promote certain types of behavior, or basically lead them to be viewed as normal, or just simply part of the culture and the traditions of society. It is something that will not happen overnight, but hopefully, with persistence, we will get there.
Absolutely. All of these structural changes take time, as we have seen. But I think it would be remiss also to not acknowledge the progress that we have done so far. We have a lot of work to do, but there's also been progress done in these areas. So I think we probably have time for one more question. And I would like to ask both of you, what has been the biggest challenge you've had in your maritime career as a woman, and how did you overcome it?
One of the biggest challenges that I have had relates to my size. I have found, because I am short, men tend to try to assess for some reason, my ability, my knowledge, my ability to be productive, or deliver based on my size. And usually I get comments like, oh, talking to you over the phone, I thought you would be taller, or I thought you would be bigger. So I think in overcoming that, some of the personal challenges that we face, we have to just let our work speak for itself. We have to display the right attitudes. We have to be aware of the fact that sometimes we need to be more vocal about things, or sometimes we just have to put in more work in order to get the respect that we deserve. But I think once you're out there and you're putting your best foot forward, you are doing good work, high quality work. People will respect you. Your male colleagues will see you as a person that they can come to for support. They will come to rely on your advice. They will respect your expertise, and basically that will help us navigate the way forward.
I would say my biggest challenge was probably in the work-life balance, and I say this from the position of more so being a woman, because I feel as though maybe it was self-imposed, but as a woman, I always, because you're in a male-dominated sector, you always feel a pressure to prove yourself. And I think it's natural in your career to want to prove yourself at a point, but I feel like if it's always been a little more consistent, right? Because I mean, the minute somebody realizes, well, you're not on top of your game, you kind of lose strength and momentum, and especially moving to a leadership role and wanting to prove, yes, I can do all of these things. Sometimes you get lost so much in the work and the commitment to the work and trying to make those developments that you forget you also have your family life aspect to deal with. So to me, it it took some discipline at some point to realize that, I mean, I think law on the whole is very consuming. And then when you put law in the maritime sector, it's just worse, because you can't stop a vessel from colliding into a berth at 11 p.m. in the night, and then having multiple phone calls come to you, and you have to answer the phone calls even if you're with your family, right? So for me, I think I had to create a discipline, which I'm still creating within these last recent years, that there must be time family wise, because women have a great purpose to play family wise as well. And you just have to, discipline yourself that at a certain moment you kind of have to close off. So while you're committed to developing the sector, there's also that time that you have to discipline yourself in terms of committing to your family as well. Right. So I suppose I have overcome it by creating certain routines that maybe on certain days, right? I mean, thankfully, vessels don't crash every day, and well, the problems are non-stop, but still, the larger problems that happen in the AMs in the morning don't happen every day. So when I do get that opportunity with my family to respect that, that's family time, and that's something that is like a job too that I have to contribute to in the same way that I have to be committed to making developments in my week. So I would definitely say it's the work-life balance, and especially from the position of a woman, trying to make sure that, um, well, I contribute not just to the work, but to the family life too.
Thank you very much, Miss Maxwell and Miss Sandefort Francis. Is Miss Bonnie with us, or did we definitely not get her back? If not, then seeing the time that we have, we're gonna take a short 15-minute break and then come back for the conclusions and recommendations. And again, thank you very much to Ms. Maxwell, Ms. Sandefort Francis, and Ms. Bonnie for your very enlightening presentations today. So we'll take a 15-minute break, and we'll be back at noon for the conclusions and recommendations.
Andrea,
All
tengo
right.
el video listo de ella.
Yes, thank you, Marisa. So please, let's go ahead and show Miss Bonnie's video, and then we'll give you also, Miss Bonnie, a chance to answer at least one question before we wrap up with the conclusions and recommendations for today. So yes, Marisa, whenever you want.
The maritime world is changing, and for the better. With help from IMO, exciting and rewarding career opportunities are opening up for women, and a new generation of strong and talented women are responding. They're proving that, in today's world, the maritime industries are for everyone. It's not about your gender, it's about what you can do. Women in maritime today are strong, powerful, and constantly challenging old-fashioned perceptions. Women in maritime are standing up for themselves and showing that what matters is not who you are, it's what you can do.
Women are strong, we are wonderful. The women I have worked with in this industry so far they're superstars. They're amazing people. They do a fantastic job, and we learn so much from one another.
We all have the same brain. We can think. We're sharp. We're bright. It requires innovative thinkers, and women are that.
I do operations, search and rescue. I am out there with the guys, taking control.
Technology is forcing us to understand that the nature of how we do work today is different.
Shipping can provide meaningful and long careers for women and young people in general, and this is what we should promote.
In my opinion, there's never been a better time to close the gender gap, and I would encourage all to get on board with gender equality. And of course, we're helping our member states to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals, in particular SDG 5.
It's a good job, it's a lucrative job, and everything is possible. That's all I can say. So go out to sea.
All right. So Miss Bonnie, we're glad to have you back, and I would like to ask you, and this is something that is a nice segue of one of the comments that we just got in the chat with some of the recommendations or perspectives from one of our male participants. But I would like to ask you to speak to, first, what are some of the main challenges that we should focus on, but also the recommendations. If you could narrow it down to three main recommendations that you would give to address these challenges?
I guess, sorry, thank you for having me back. I do apologize for all the IT and connectivity issues I've been having. I guess today my seat at the table has been so adequately covered by the other panelists, so I do apologize. Some of the challenges, I guess, one of the biggest challenges is that need for data, having that data to that baseline data to understand how many women are working in the sector and what positions they occupy. That's really important. We should have some baseline data when the survey closes, because survey is open till the 30th of June. So we should, in early autumn, have some baseline data. And then from there, obviously that will dictate our training programs, because we can start then identifying the data, the gender, the sort of training gaps. Because if you've identified, hopefully, the data gaps, that will then give us a clearer picture of, you know, what the situation is, and we can try and start tracking women throughout their careers as well. We've heard from graduates from IMLI, IMO, International Maritime Law Institute, of course, World Maritime University, and there are those training opportunities out there. But as I said, and what the fellow panelists have echoed as well, is while those opportunities are there, people don't know necessarily where to find them. So I guess the second challenge would be the visibility. This pandemic has really shown the importance of shipping and highlighted the sacrifice of those 400,000 plus seafarers that are currently stuck at sea because of crew change or repatriation issues. And I guess it would be giving maritime more visibility outside of this small community that we're in, making the industry more visible and the importance of shipping to transporting world trade. One of the biggest personal challenges, I guess, is me personally fearing I'm not good enough. And a lot of the sort of leader accelerator programs that we are sort of working on in IMO, not to challenge unconscious bias and stereotypes, of course, is this imposter syndrome, fear of not being good enough. Harassment and bullying. At some point, my technology decided to be against me, so I couldn't contribute to that really exciting discussion that was happening. We developed last year a global strategy for women seafarers to try and support them in terms of career development and retention. We know there's a shortage of seafarers, and we know also that there are leaks in the pipeline. Why are women leaving the industry? One of the, I guess, low points, if you like, of last year was being sent a video which followed on from the Me Too movement, and it was some actors based on real accounts of Swedish seafarers. It's called Letter Anchor, Anchors Away, and basically it was real stories of women that women seafarers that had experienced harassment and bullying, and it was really hard-hitting truths, and it really opened my eyes to saying, well, if this is happening in Sweden, where they're very progressive and have so much policy and legislation towards mainstreaming gender, then what on earth is going on in the rest of the world? So we started a campaign, and the campaign was hashtag I'm on board with gender equality. If you could make one change, just one change, to improve or to sort of mainstream gender for seafarers, what would that change be? And some of the top 10 analytics we got, it was a campaign, it wasn't anything with sort of qualitative data, but what it showed, you know, those top 10 changes, would it be more sort of training on diversity alongside SDCW training, or improving the sort of sanitation facilities on board, to you know, and my sort of dream, if you like, and I don't think it's something that's unattainable, is if we could collectively come together. There are so many networks, associations, organizations out there that have so much goodwill in terms of actually progressing the gender agenda forward. Wouldn't it be great if we could make that one change together? I don't think it's the sole responsibility of one entity to sort of take this agenda forward. But as I said, you know, what we're trying to do is move it away from words, just talking, and move that into tangible actions. And despite the technological problems I've had today, I would love to take this conversation offline and continue this going forward, and work with as many of the participants here on the call to see how we could move this dialogue forward. You know, we are now 9 years off attaining the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. You know, well, what comes next? Whose responsibility is it to move it forward? How can we not lose the talent of this industry to other industries? Because, you know, that's what's happening. And, you know, with new technology, digitalization, decarbonization, you know, we're moving away from the image of brute force to sort of to more, you know, focusing on those STEM subjects. And that's what we're really trying to support the young generation with, especially women from developing countries, to encourage them to take on board these STEM subjects, because that will hopefully stand them in good grounds, you know, going forward. But we are making progress, and I want to stress that it's not quick enough.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bunny. And I'll have one more question for you, just to give you the chance. And we completely understand the technological challenges that we all face nowadays. So no worries about that. And this is one question that we got through email. What have you observed as attitudes, behaviors, or obstacles that women impose on themselves or other women that hold them back?
Is this for me? Sorry. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I guess fear of not being good enough. I mean, there's so much research out there. When now we're looking at gender neutral language, especially in terms of recruitment, and that's something that we're looking at, not just supporting member states, but also an industry, of course, but also internally within IMO, that when we send a vacancy out, we look at the language we use, because there's so much research out there that shows that there are certain sort of words that you can use that you know, we just have to be very careful with the language that we use, so that we're not dissuading women from applying. I know myself, again, to talk about the imposter syndrome, a fear of not being good enough, and something that you touched upon earlier, one of your speakers touched upon earlier, was the importance of having allies, male and female allies. And that's why my mentorship campaign, my Maritime Mentor campaign, is sort of giving recognition to those mentors. We have a phenomenal amount of networks out there, all promoting diversity and inclusion. And that's where, you know, the conversation has to move towards, and getting away from the fact of being about gender. So, I mean, we are in a male-dominated industry. It's not about rewriting the narrative. It's about saying it is about your competencies, and let's make this an industry that is diverse and sustainable, and that women need to be included in all aspects of the decision-making process, given a seat at the table, especially using this opportunity of COVID and what we've learned from women leaders in the pandemic, I think is really important. But yeah, I mean, unconscious bias. I mean, there's so much sort of more awareness now of stereotyping, and it's sort of learned skill. But again, we're trying to focus on confidence building, soft skills, not just giving technical training to our participants, but also sort of giving them more confidence and making it more of an enabling environment so that they do have the confidence to try and apply for higher positions. And also catering for people that take career breaks, that decide to have a family and then come back into the industry, and where are the opportunities for them to retrain. So to try and, through these short upskilling courses, give people the confidence to be able to, I mean, I work on a Women in Maritime program, but that's only one aspect of a huge capacity building and training program we have within the organization. We have one dedicated to security, it's and then regional programs. And basically what we're trying to do throughout all our sort of training programs and initiatives is to make sure that we have gender indicators or gender markers, so that we're trying to, whilst give technical assistance and build capacity, do that in a sustainable way. But I wish I had the silver bullet answer to that question. But as I say, it's really hard to sort of look at yourself and say, okay, yeah, fear of not knowing everything. I don't think that's anything unusual. And just go out there, seek those opportunities, network, find those mentorship platforms. There's some phenomenal platforms and resources out there for anyone that's experienced harassment and bullying in the workplace. And with, as I said earlier, with so many challenges come so many opportunities. And it's through forums like this where you can normally have a dialogue and discussion, if technology allows, that we learn from each other, that we can connect, and that we can move forward.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bonia, and I would absolutely echo, especially you highlighting all the opportunities that have come with the pandemic, because we are very quick to complain and to point out all the negative things, but with that also come opportunities, as you have very well expressed. Ms. Kirkhoff, could you please request the floor so you can engage in your question? You need to press the blue button. I don't know if we're getting her through.
Give her 2 seconds, Andrea. There she is.
There we go. Please go ahead whenever you're ready, Ms. Kirkhoff. Just unmute your mic and your camera if you'd like.
Can you please unmute your microphone? Ms. Kirkhoff, can you please unmute your mic?
All
Can
right.
you please request the floor again? We don't hear you. Are you using Google Chrome for this connection? If not, can you please try to use Google Chrome and come back in? Andrea, she hasn't even disconnected from the session, so I don't know if you want to wait.
Okay, we'll just keep going in the interest of time and seeing that we're a little bit behind. And then, Ms. Kirkhoff, if you're able to reconnect, or would you like to post? All right, she just posted her question on the chat, actually. She was following up on the speaker's suggestion that we carry this conversation forward after this roundtable, and just expressing her interest in being involved in any such initiatives. We greatly appreciate your participation, Ms. Kirkhoff, through this event, and would very much welcome to continue this conversation offline as well. So now I will, again, thank you for bearing with us through all the technical difficulties, and just being patient and dedicating your time to this very important conversation. And to continue with the last part of our agenda, I would like to give the floor now to Ms. Audrey McNeil. She is a coordinator of International Maritime Security Platform for the Port Authority of Jamaica. She was our facilitator also on Wednesday, covering the Women in Maritime Domain Forum. She will proceed to give us some of the recommendations and conclusions. Ms. McNeil, welcome again, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Andrea. It has been such a pleasure and an honor to be part of this amazing forum. And in the interest of time, I'm going to be as concise as possible in putting the recommendations and conclusions together. To start, I must say that we had an amazing and extraordinary 3 days, and we have left this forum feeling encouraged by the success stories, comforted to know that we're all in this together, and wiser because we're seeing a clearer path to change. My job today is to do a quick recap on how we move forward. A lot of these points were captured from our distinguished women on panels and your participation and contribution. And to sum it all up, we'll be looking at what each of us can do as individuals and to drive the change. And also we can look at how we're going to move advocacy and policy as well. I'll be using a PowerPoint presentation just to make this so that you too can share as I speak with and see the points for yourself. Next slide, please, Mauricio. So the basis of this entire conversation, why are we here? It is because of the awareness that women are being discriminated against in maritime careers considered traditionally for men. And we all agree that this is fueled by different things, but I think what was outstanding was culture and misconceptions. Next slide, please. So some of the challenges we identified, we may not have captured all of them, but some of the main ones, we recognize that women have to work twice as hard to receive equal recognition as their male counterparts. They are more susceptible to rumors. Leadership is associated with masculinity, muscle versus intellect. And women are viewed as breakable and fragile, and they need to be protected in environments which include the workforce, especially in the maritime space. Next. We're also dogged by misconceptions. There is a misconception that a woman's ability or desire to engage in certain types of jobs are affected by her wanting to be more at home, or that we are so emotional, the way we react to difficult situations. So we're not suited for these kinds of jobs. Next. So let's focus a little now on the action. What can we do? What can I do? So it's the personal, and then there's the advocacy side. Now, to start with the personal side, we need to identify the syndromes, the things that dog us, that lead us to these limiting beliefs about ourselves as women. And we need to change the internal narrative. And we're going to look at a little of these syndromes that are always things that are playing out in our head that we can change. We also need to choose to challenge. Do not give up. Keep going. Set personal goals to advance our careers. We look a little also at the details that came out that are helpful. Continue to do our part. We have identified the challenges, and each of us can do our part to move a little bit closer. And of course, there's advocacy for policy changes. Next slide, please. So the syndromes, the limiting beliefs that we need to acknowledge and eliminate in order to have a seat at the table and to be present and prepared for opportunities were identified by one of our distinguished panelists. The first one, that women are not interested in money. So because of that, we do not negotiate salaries. We need to value ourselves more. Secondly, we're afraid to pursue a career because it's going to take away from what we are born to do. In other words, to be a wife and a mom, and we don't want to put ourselves forward. Another limiting belief, we're never ready. We feel that we don't have what it takes. And if things are not 100% perfect, we are not going to offer ourselves for a job. On the other hand, our male counterparts are willing to jump and build their wings on the way down. We need to have that same attitude. The note taker, we don't participate. We don't bring ourselves forward in meetings. So we end up just being the little note taker. And we accept that. We have to stop accepting that. Let our voices be heard. The next one is we will stay in the background and we prepare the presentation, but we're quite happy to give it to our male counterparts to do the presenting. So we are the brain, but we are behind the scenes. And there's the imposter syndrome, where we feel that we don't believe in our abilities. We're thankful for the job, and I was lucky to be hired. And, we put forward that smile, but we're actually sabotaging ourselves. We need to believe in our ability, and we must not be afraid to be ambitious. Next, please. So let's talk now about solutions and recommendations. First and foremost, we're going to work on ourselves. If we find that we fall into any of the categories mentioned, then this is the time to set our career goals, take charge of our own future plans and not lead it to chance. And one of our distinguished participants and panelists spoke about using the very popular SMART method to achieve this. So first, we have to be specific. We have to say, what do I wish to achieve? Where do I see myself? What do I want? Then we have to have a tool to measure our progress towards that objective, so that we can have certain indicators, so that we can know, how am I doing? Then it has to be assignable. We are the ones now. Where am I at? It also must be realistic, very realistic. We must look at something that we know cannot be achieved at this time. However, let us do it a little at a time and set very realistic goals. And finally, timelines are so important. Set a timeline that will help you to be able to measure where you are at. Next slide, please. Also, as women, we must accept the opportunities that we have earned. We should not step back or feel we're not ready. Use platforms such as the one we have now, the forums, roundtables, to connect with other women fighting for the same cause and join with them to advocate for change. We had an invitation today from Miss, oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, we have an invitation today from Miss Bunny, Helen Bunny from IMO to be a part of the change. Let us take advantage of this. Most importantly, we have to invest in ourselves. Use the resources and the tools that are available so that we can continue growing in our fields. The more we become knowledgeable, and that's how respect follows. So when our counterparts realize that we are good at our jobs, then the respect automatically follows. So take advantage and prepare ourselves for the opportunities that will come forward. And of course, we must be each other's mentors and coaches. We must encourage and become mentors and coaches for other women. And when we speak of coaching is task-oriented and guidance, supporting women who enter the field at every level to become who they want to be. It's short-term, it's hands-on. And a lot of women come into fields within maritime and they encounter roadblocks and challenges. When we are coaches, we help them to overcome these and to conquer. Mentoring is more informal. It's based on trust and respect and a relationship. So there's a place for that. So we as women must be each other's mentors and coaches. And of course, to move forward, we must acknowledge and acquire support from men. Never believe that all men don't want to see women in this space. That's really not true. And I'd like to share with you an experience, because when we have men in leadership who are our advocates, it opens the way for so much. Just yesterday, the Prime Minister of Jamaica opened his budget presentation by acknowledging the women in Parliament. This is the first year that there have been so many women in Parliament. And he took the time to identify the assets that they were now bringing to the work. He said women are compassionate, they are patient, very organized, and diligent. And all of these sound like the assets we identified on day 2 of this forum. So if you find that you have advocates in men, take advantage of it. We need to invite them to these forums and invite them to be with us, because we're now building their confidence in our ability to contribute equally in this space. So what will be our focus? One of the biggest takeaways was you need to see it to be it. Promote women in maritime by visuals, pictures and videos, inviting the young people to see the career live and direct. And that will help to increase the interest. I remember one of our participants said that before coming into the maritime field, she wasn't even aware of a lot of things happening in the maritime field. For myself, I came in from a non-maritime area, and it was when I actually started working in maritime, I realized how many ports existed in Jamaica. I would be driving through the country and I never did pay attention. We can change this. Let people see it, and then the women will want to be it. Capacity building initiatives. As I said before, we must prepare ourselves for the future opportunities by investing in ourselves. And that way, we will not be forgotten, as one of our participants said on day 2. Focus on our assets. Learn to use these strengths to market ourselves in the industry. In recruitment initiatives, if we are involved, let us get into the schools, career days, showcase the women in maritime. And of course, it's only by showcasing ourselves, performing in these areas, that we can debunk the stereotypes and perceptions towards women that decide to work in these fields. And if we do this, we will be getting closer and closer to our goal. Next slide, please. And of course, today's presentations were absolutely extraordinary again and necessary. And we got a vision of how we can move with policy changes. There was a visual that was put up by Miss Daffodil Maxwell from Trinidad and Tobago, and it showed us the difference between equity and equality, and that picture was worth 1,000 words. The statement made that sometimes gender inequality is not intentional, but the absence of properly defined and standardized policies that give rise to the appearance of discrimination definitely opened our eyes to where to start to make the change. And when we think about it, Ms. Maxwell spoke about salary ranges, recruitment policies, job descriptions, terms and conditions, eliminating certain words and things that automatically exclude women, develop policies that benefit women. We must be consulted about those laws and implementations. So we need to put ourselves forward. But let us not just blame the system. Let us see how we can make it work for us by ensuring that there's advocacy towards policy changes. I was also impressed by talking about even the structure of physical structures, male-female bathrooms, so that females can feel included and welcome, and it sends a message also to our male counterparts. So another point to remember is also our personal responsibility and how we as women can also help to make us look better by how we approach our jobs and our balance. Also to take advantage of all the programs being offered at a local and a regional and international level to assist women in their growth. And an offer was made by Ms. Helen Booney of the IMO for us to be involved. Let us take advantage of this. Let's present ourselves at these forums. Let us be in the forefront. Final slide, please. So, all in all, what can we do? We must work on changing the narrative. There is an urgent need for a cultural shift. We must change the environment. We don't need the environment to change in a large way. We did discuss certain things that could be done from a policy perspective to make it a more embracing environment for us and to give us equality. We spoke about equality versus equity and seeing that equity is fairness. So we need an environment that speaks to equity because we have different needs or requirements to perform, and we need not be ashamed of that. So we're going to push for equity versus equality. And so that is how we change the environment. We personally, it's not about changing ourselves and adopting syndromes that cause us to pull back. And finally, this was the penultimate slide, the final slide. Women are assets in the maritime sector. And let us remember the theme for 2021, choose to challenge. Therefore, all that we have learned today and the previous 2 days, all the suggestions, we're now seeing a clearer path, pushing for the advocacy, bringing men on board to help us to advocate for the change in the environment. All this is a part of choosing to challenge. Therefore, I hope I have captured all the main points, but of course, everything will be available to you for recap. And thank you so much for your attention. Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Ms. McNeil, for this very encompassing presentation that definitely captures the spirit of the last 3 days and provides a lot of insight for the future path that this initiative must take on. I would like to extend my gratitude and support to you also for your work throughout this virtual roundtable, not just today, with this very great conclusion. So thank you very much. And now, finally, to conclude and close this event, I would like to introduce Ms. Yolanda Botet. She's the Deputy Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Committee Against Terrorism of the OAS. Yolanda, welcome. The floor is yours. I believe you're muted.
Can you hear me now, Andrea?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, thank you so much. That was inspiring. I love that presentation. Thank you to Audrey McNeil for that really inspiring summary of the virtual seminar this week. It really warmed my heart. And I have to say, it's my pleasure to be able to close this virtual roundtable on women in the maritime and port security area today. I know we've explored this topic from lots of different points of views, and I know you have gleaned insights, analysis, experiences, and most importantly, I hope it's generated hope and increased all of our expectations in addressing gender gaps in this key economic sector in the Western Hemisphere. So thank you to you all. I think over the last 3 days, we've heard from a number of very successful professionals in this area, and they've approached the topic in a very thoughtful way, framing the issues for us. They've been really honest, and they've shared their personal experiences working in the maritime and port security area. And they've also provided some key data points on indicators reflecting that there obviously exists a significant gender inequality, and that still remains. They've also inspired some very, or shared their inspiring success stories, and they've taught us lessons about leadership, about courage, and about resiliency. I particularly liked what I heard a little while ago, build your wings as you fly. Build your wings as you sail too. So much to think about today. And finally, I want to mention that the panelists, as you know, have highlighted where challenges remain and where our work needs to continue to focus, and where we need, as a group, as women, as men, to join hands and break through those glass ceilings that very much remain. I'd like to recall what Alison August Treppel said at the beginning of this seminar, which she said, "I think I find it hard to believe that with all the evolutions, primarily on the technological spectrum, that here we are in the 21st century and we continue to have such a low percentage in positions held by women in the maritime domain. Therefore, as Audrey said a little while ago, we need to start shifting those cultural misguided beliefs and address the stereotypes and biases which limit women's ability to assume leadership roles." And as previously mentioned by one of the panelists, leadership has no gender. We know that instinctively, we know that in practice. So with that in mind, I want to congratulate all the participants in this week's program who have provided energy and their ideas. I also want to thank our guest speakers for actively participating and sharing their experiences and their vision for tomorrow. In particular, Sick Day is very grateful for the support of our donor, the Government of the United Kingdom, which has wholeheartedly supported this initiative and made it possible for all of us to be here today. So thank you. I also want to emphasize our appreciation to each of the guest speakers and the panelists who have included, among others, representatives of the United Kingdom, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Belize, Canada, the United States, and the British Virgin Islands. And in addition, I want to thank our colleagues from the International Maritime Organization and our own OAS colleagues from the Inter-American Commission on Women and the Department of Social Inclusion and the Inter-American Committee on Ports. All together, we've made a remarkable, we've taken a remarkable step this week here. A special thanks again to Audrey McNeil from the Port Authority of Jamaica, who's been extraordinarily supportive in this initiative, and the Government of Jamaica for its assistance as well. And it also gives me personally great pleasure to give a hearty shout out to Liz Laurie, Sick Day's Maritime Program Lead, and her colleague Karen Grubbs, who has worked into the late hours each night to make sure each of you had a very positive experience this week. We've had over 80 participants consistently tuned into this program throughout the week, many who hail from all parts of the Caribbean, and we are very encouraged by the strong level of participation. So in closing, I want to highlight one important lesson of the many that came up this week. And that's the need to continue to move away from being a reactive society and instead really focus greater attention on preventive efforts and undertake initiatives focused on gender awareness and really bear down on increasing recruitment of women in these critical security-related industries. All this in the long run, as we know, is going to protect our region's critical infrastructure, and it's going to foster greater preparedness and resiliencies among our communities. And it's going to increase the exchange of operational information with our neighbors and our partners, and this helps all of us stay safe. And so I hope that going forward from today, Sick Day will continue its partnership with the UK, as well as our panelists and our distinguished participants and our authorities. And together, I am confident that we can build a better and brighter future for all of us and help to prevent incidents and secure the maritime domain into the future against all manners of threats. So thank you again to you all and wish you the best.
Thank you, Yolanda. And again, thank you to all the participants that have connected with us over the past 3 days. I would also like to invite you to follow us on Twitter and on Facebook, where we're constantly posting about similar events, webinars, and other interesting information in not just maritime security, but all areas related to countering terrorism in the Americas. So our Twitter is OEA_SICTE, and our Facebook is the same, OEA SICTE. And with that, thank you very much, and I hope you have a great weekend.